Welcome everybody off on the interweb land, and everybody here. What a glorious, wonderful, rainy day here in South Carolina. Yes, awesome. Last time I spoke, I was talking about culture, right? And then I was kind of talking about the divine culture and how the divine culture actually can invade all the other cultures. Well, I'm going to start off with a little story, and then I'm going to jump into some of the things that I had an idea on the cultural line. Let's see. A couple months ago, I got a phone call from an old coworker of mine, and he said, "Man, I need your help. If you would, please pray. I've got a family member, one of his cousins. He's got two cousins. He said one of his cousins, his son was on the football field, and he had come off the field. He's a high schooler. He had come off the field and collapsed in cardiac arrest. They did what they had to do at the field. They got him to the hospital, and he's currently in a coma. So if you could just, be praying, lifting up the family, right?" And of course I did, and just in agreement with the family and everything. And it's amazing some of the things that happen in life, I guess is the easiest way to put it. So he calls me back the weekend after Mother's Day, and I get a text, and he goes, "Dude, you have to call me. I cannot talk to you through a text about this." And I was like, all right. So I give him a call back. I'm like, "What's up, man?" And he goes, "Remember I told you about my cousin?" I was like, "Yep." He goes, "His son in the hospital, right?" I said, "Yep." And he goes, "I had another cousin that about 3-4 years ago, her son was involved in something. They don't know if it was side related or actually fully related, but it was it was something drug related. So I don't really know the full details of it. I was assuming either he had done some drugs in past, or something in a deal went bad and ended up passing, but her son had passed away about 4 years prior to this incident, okay? And so about 72 hours, this kid was in a coma. All the family came down together. It was, as you could imagine, it was some serious news. You got a high schooler here, up to date on COVID vaccines, drops on the football field, and now he's in a coma. 72 hours later, he wakes up. And they had talked to him, and he couldn't speak at that moment. And so the doctor was like, "Well, can you write something down?" And he kind of shook his head, and he wrote down the name of this lady, their cousin. And he was like, "Well, she's not here in the hospital. She's back at the hotel." And he wrote her name down again and again. So they were like, "Okay, obviously this kid wants to talk to her. So go get her and bring her here." Well, by the time she got there, they kind of revived him enough a bit to where he could actually start to speak, which was, a miraculous thing in itself. And so what happens is the boy who had this whole thing happen, okay, comes back and looks at her and goes, "I just spent a bunch of time with your son, and he wanted to let you know he's good." How do you explain that? Right? Here you have two separate families with horrific incidences that happen. One of them, they lose their son. Another one, they're about to lose their son. They don't know what's about to happen. All they know is in the moment, Jesus enters the picture and brings healing to the whole family. Kingdom culture invaded a moment. So now you have everyone in that family has a moment to explain who Jesus is, right? I mean, that's such a powerful moment, okay? And what I wanted to speak on today, which is the title of the message, is who is the Jesus that you know? Because I had a mentor that had made a beautiful line when he was sharing to us. He said, listen, regardless of what you study, you're only going to give to people the Jesus that you know. So it's if you've studied him in a book and you've received revelation of that knowledge of him in a book, that's what you're going to give. And so it's like, okay, if you, just as an example, say you have COVID, okay? I'm not giving you scarlet fever. I'm giving you COVID. It doesn't matter how much I tell you it's scarlet fever. It's not. It's COVID, okay? So it's the same concept of when it comes to Jesus, when you're talking to people about Jesus. You're going to give the Jesus that you actually know, not the one that you can read about or the one that you want to tell somebody about. You know, we've done very good at evangelizing a Jesus that we actually don't know, but one that we've studied out and we believe we know, right? But we're giving something out of knowledge, not experience. Okay? And I think that's one of the major flaws with certain evangelism is we're not giving experience. And there was an old rabbi teaching that said, you can only teach that which you know, right? But you only know that because you've experienced it. So that it's a different knowledge. It's not something you've gone to school for or looked at. It's something you've actually experienced. Okay? So in light of that, in diving into divine culture, trying to find out how to invade different cultures without bringing war, without culture fighting culture, right? Because we've seen too much of that today. And the church is very bad at staying inside their culture and fighting through that rather than trying to come into divine culture where they're supposed to be and come into all the different cultures and invade it, right? So what I did is I started going back and I started studying something, because that's one way to look at our personal lives. Who is the Jesus that we know, right? I've had a few experiences that were beyond a shadow of a doubt that I knew, you know. One of the ones I thought of this morning that threw me completely off guard. I'd just been, the PC way of saying it, I've just been released from the church that I was first ordained in. And I was in a kind of a down state, struggling a little bit with what to do. And it's my birthday. And I'm like, well, it's just another day. Let's get going, right? So I'm in the shower getting ready. And I hear because it shook me to the core. I'm the only one in the house. Everybody else is gone, and I hear, "Happy birthday, Dan. I love you." I pulled the curtain back because I literally, like, who's in this house? I mean, it felt that loud. And yet here you are in an experience that's just so simple, and in the moment, so impactful, right? So those are some of the things that have really kept me going in some times, is just little experiences of things along those lines. It's like, listen, he knows the details. There's times, I was just talking with somebody, there was a Facebook post, I thought it was funny. There's a lady who has an outfit on that has no back, and she's kneeling down at the pew, and the question was, here you see this woman, do you believe her prayers are being answered? And I just went, I said, for me, it would be a super religious person that would ask that question to begin with. Because, one, I don't even need to be in a church to have my prayers answered. And every single prayer is answered. It may not be the answer you want, but it's answered. Right? So, I got to the point where I'm getting at here. I decided to go on a little quick journey to kind of help me understand the people that I read in the Bible. So I started asking questions like, who was Jesus to the Apostle John? So you start reading his writings, okay? And you start seeing John, the beloved, who laid his head on Jesus' breast, right? The apostle that Jesus loved. And then you hear God is love, and you see all about love through all of his writings. Even the writings, see, this is the part where I think we missed it because we have not understood the Apostle the Apostle John. Even when you get to the book of Revelation, it's a revelation of Jesus, right? And even though he's giving you the things that are happening in the times, the things that are happening at the cultural time frame right now, the whole message is still love, because the end of Revelations talks about everything's been restored, everything is good, and everything is there as God had planned it, and we're completely there, right? So John's message is love. And it didn't matter what you did to him, at his core, he always taught God is love, right? I asked about Peter. That's an interesting one, because you only got 2 little books about him, and then, of course, some of his adventures in Acts that you read about. I look at his, and I kind of pick some of the little things apart, and I kind of go, I think his was more on faith. Okay? Because, when you think about it, it's like he denied Jesus 3 times. And then Jesus comes back and goes, dude, it's okay. I love you. Right? So when you go to his little writings in the back, he's talking about, hey, listen, like, here's another thing that I thought was kind of funny was, you can tell he hung out with Paul when you read his writings, because you have some grace that's intermixed with his writings on faith that you go through it. So there is a splinter that Paul influenced Peter, I think, and helped him get to where he really needed to be too. But the one that really captivates me is Paul. And here's why. First off, Paul wrote most of the New Testament. So you got plenty of stuff to try to understand where he's coming from, right? So trying to dive into who was the Jesus that Paul knew. Okay? I believe Paul's message and the Jesus he knew is grace. Because here he was, Saul, being trained to become high priest one day of the temple system that they believed without a shadow of a doubt was all God. Went on the hunt for everybody of the way to take him out because it was not of Yahweh. Right? And of course, if you know Jewish law, well, that's, especially when it was Jews that were the main ones that were leading the way. In the very beginning with the apostles and everybody there, it was all the Jews that were being converted. And so they were almost probably looked upon as being treasonous. And the penalty of treason is death. So Paul was all about putting everybody to death that was breaking the law. Right? They were putting Jesus as Lord and Savior in what Paul's mind was before Yahweh, not realizing they were the same. So on his road to Damascus, he's kicked off his high horse, right? Knocked to the ground. And I find it funny, his response was, "Yes, Lord." Right? So he gets knocked down. He sees Jesus in all of his glory. He gets his correction. And I believe in that moment to come, when he was blinded and in Damascus, I believe Paul knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Jesus should have killed him. Because I believe he got the total picture. He didn't understand the grace yet. But I think he saw the picture and realized he should have been killed. Which led him to going to Arabia for 3 years to fully understand the revelation that was given him. Okay? Now, he was a highly intelligent man. Highly intelligent. I believe he received the Holy Spirit when his eyes came back and he saw the understanding of what was going on, because his first initial response was, "I need to go." Okay? So then when you start getting into a lot of his writings, you're looking at Romans, Galatians, Ephesians, even in the Corinthians. Okay? You're seeing this message of grace. It's always coming out there, right? Especially in Ephesians. When he starts talking to them and he's going, "Listen, this whole thing is done on grace. Period. And if you'll grab onto that, it'll open up even more." Okay? I believe this is where evangelism needs to head to in this day and time. We take the motto of the Reformation. We are saved by grace through faith, right? But notice, Paul said we're saved by grace. Most of us focus on the faith and not the grace. Right? Because, we can't go, you can't have the grace unless you have the faith, because it's through the faith, right? But here's the thing. What is grace? Basically favor. Okay? So if grace is favor, and then what is faith? So we hear faith going, oh, faith is hope being awaited for. So you've got hope that is yet to come. Okay? So let's look at the total message that he said by being saved by grace through faith. We're being saved with favor by hope that is yet to come. Right? How can we reach anybody telling them you're a sinner and you need Jesus that got nailed to a cross, crucified and died and buried, right? All that's truth. But we're not extending grace to the people needing it when we needed it. That's how we came into the faith, was by grace. So how do we forget? How do we withhold grace when we want grace? You know what I mean? So if you're withholding grace, what does that mean? You're not receiving grace. So we keep looking at little things going, oh, but in our culture, this is why I did culture first. In our culture, this is the way the church says, right? You must do the confession, say the prayer, and then you can come into our fold in our culture, and you can come into our understanding, and then you'll know why our culture is the way it is, why we have the rules that we have, why we have the customs that we have, is because it's our culture. And then you can come and receive that, right? Well, guess what? That was man-made, the culture in the church. We established it out of our weakness. That was the way we could take it in our minds and go, this is how we can keep things going the way we want them to go. And so we reestablished the religious system after Jesus tore it down. Okay? So we omit grace from the picture and we stick with faith because that sounds so much more spiritual. Okay? And yet, here's the truth. Neither one of them belong to you. The grace and the faith that you receive in Christ. So they don't even belong to you because you didn't have the grace nor the faith to do what needed to be done. So here's a question, okay? Did the animals on the Ark of Noah, what did they receive to actually be on the ark? Kind of crazy, huh? So if Jesus comes and builds a new covenant and establishes the better covenant period, right? Are we not just passengers on the ship? He built the ark, not us. And yet we walk around in the arrogance on the boat as if we built it. All because we've established a culture that has become toxic. Because in its toxicity, it was because of control. How can we keep people giving? How can we keep our realm of influence going? How can we keep all this stuff being the way that it is so we don't lose anything, right? And yet, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he told you to go into all the earth proclaiming the gospel. And the gospel was, you don't need to work to try to reach God anymore. There's no more sacrifices needed. There's no more offerings needed. There's nothing else you could ever think you were doing in the low wisdom that you had, in the darkness of your human mind that you had, thinking that you could talk to God or gods in your darkness. When the reality is, Jesus came, conquered it all. And the people he was trying desperately to get to were actually the super religious. Because he would always say things, look, I didn't come here for those that don't need the physician. I came here for the sick. Right? So what the Pharisees automatically think, oh, you didn't come for me then. And yet he literally tells them, you say you see and you hear, and yet you really don't even understand who's standing directly in front of you, so therefore you're blind and deaf. If you would listen to what I'm saying, you would realize I'm the promise of Abraham. I've brought all this out because he's been taking me on a journey of identifying who he is to me. And how can I interject that into different cultures? Because as I can go to the point and inject those in different cultures, I'm literally injecting him into that. Because it's him that my experience is with. It's not something I've studied. It's not something that I've tried to build things upon or anything like that. It was a moment where, in my low point, I had an experience with grace that actually built faith. And that's what we need to be giving to people that are broken, that are in need of whatever they're in need of. You know? We have a hard time. Just what I see culturally right now. The church has come under attack. You'll hear a lot of pastors talk about culturally, we're under attack. We're under attack from, the government trying to take away our tax-free status. We're under attack from all the legislation they're passing of whatever evil that's going out there throughout the world, right? Their main target being the LGBTQ community, because they seem to be running the forefront of the culture, right? And yet, all you hear is a culture going against a culture, which is judgment. That's all you hear. You're not having... I heard that when Apostle Matthew was up there with William Young, he made a statement during one of his little talks, and he said, if you have not sat down and talked to a gay person, heard the story of a transgender, then shut up and sit down. Because you don't have any authority to speak. Because you're not willing to treat them as a human being. And to actually let Christ come in the way he comes in by grace. You're not willing to extend grace because you're too busy looking at the judgments of what Paul calls the works of the flesh. And yet here we are. We operate in the works of the flesh too. And yet we go, oh, but we're under grace. Right? So, I think if I need it, they need it. And I think when we can start seeing people in whatever culture they're in as human beings, the only way to cross cultural things, to go in to different cultures, is the same way that Paul did it, is by grace. And Paul kept saying, I became all things to all people so that I may win some. Right? So he goes into different cultures around. Here's a new fact that I learned too. Paul was actually the one that came up with the word Gentile. Because in his walk in his life, he was trying to go, Okay, you have the people at Ephesus are different than the people at Corinth, and they're different from the people in Galatia. And yet, what he was trying to establish was you had Jews, you had the Hellenists, you had those that didn't go into the way, or the Greeks or whatever, and he was trying to just bring it all into one thing to show, hey, look, here's basically what it is. You had the children of Israel, the Jewish people, who brought the promise to you, and then you had everybody else. And so everybody else became Gentile. Right? And so the odd part is the Gentiles, if you look at the tabernacle, the Gentiles were put out at the outer door, which, if I'm not mistaken, was called the way. Right? So when they come in through the way, you're in that outer court area. Right? So you're in the way. Then you go into the inner court, which is the truth, where you have some ministry being done. But the holiest of holies, that curtain is called the life. So when he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, everybody comes through those doorways. Doesn't matter, as Paul would say, it doesn't matter if you're Jew, Gentile, Hellenistic, Greek, barbarian. It doesn't matter. None of those things matter. They're all immaterial. Because it's only Jesus, him crucified, risen. And not only is it him crucified and risen, the greatest faith that we can actually understand is we are actually seated with him right now, right next to the Father. That's the great mystery. The part of the Gentiles, everybody else is brought into the promise too, and everyone is actually sitting there by faith in Jesus. All saved by grace. So that Reformation mantra changed for me 2 weeks ago when that actually was brought up to me in study. And I actually looked at it and I was like, wow, where could we be if our evangelism was done by grace? Because I think when we get into grace and then you get into the cultural idea of it, that's why we have in the church people going, oh, you got these grace people, right? And it just gives them a license to sin. And that's not it at all. And it's mainly, I think, because they're so focused on faith. Whereas if we would focus on grace as our means of salvation, then we would understand our faith. And then to put it in context, just as a last little blurb that I kind of put together was, all this obviously is before the destruction of the temple. So you have the Father working in all the apostles, in all the evangelists, in all the teachers in that time frame, in grace, to get them prepared and ready for the grace they were going to need when Rome came in to take the temple. And I think we learned from that and put it into proper context and look at that from our own lives too. Because whether or not we want to admit it, we've got temples of worship up that don't belong to God. They may be a little different than those days, but we still have them. And it's the grace on our lives that empowers us to be able to still walk and gain the revelation that we need. And that's the other thing that Paul was talking about in life. So you who are seasoned, extend the grace to those that aren't. You come down to their level so that you can help build them back up, because you're supposed to be those that are of character of the faith, right? So it's been down to the grace. Extend the grace to those just as you extend the grace to others outside. So it all comes down to the Jesus that you know. Who is the Jesus that you know? Is it the Jesus that comes when your son is in a coma and comes back? Is it a Jesus that extends a word beyond the grave to you to completely give you hope and life again? Is it the Jesus that says happy birthday when you've been kicked out of church? Is it the Jesus that walks with you in the desert in the middle of the night when you have all opportunities for terrible things to happen to you, but walks with you and you know that? Who is the Jesus that you know? Because that's the Jesus that you give to everybody else. So with that, thank you for joining us. If you like, please give us a like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. We love you. Thank you. And please don't hesitate to come and be a part of one of our services. We'd love to hug your neck and love on you for a little bit and enjoy the faith together with Christ.